Call this meeting to order. Let's stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The clerk will call a roll.
I will now take the roll. Councilmember Porter,
Present.
Councilmember Middleton,
Present.
Councilmember Kavanaugh, Councilmember Dundon,
Present.
Councilmember Rathmel,
Present.
Councilmember Hotchkiss,
Present.
and Council President Matavetsky.
Present.
Thank you.
Great. Quorum is present. So I will pass the microphone over to our Finance Committee Chair, Robert Kavanaugh, for RL 24-13, and we'll invite up Deputy Mayor Hyman. And Chuck Shager. Thanks.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening, Megan. So,
Go ahead.
Oh, with the RL, reading out the RL. Sorry.
Okay, this is RL 24-13, the bond ordinance authorizing various capital improvement investments in and for the city not to exceed $11,937,500.
thank you.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. So this is an ordinance authorizing finance various capital improvements in and for the city. Chuck Shager is here tonight to answer questions council might have about the funding process itself. Well, I out and answer any questions that council might have about the projects that we'll be bonding for. The project is page 9 of your packets, and these were approved as part of the 2024 budget process and capital improvement plan.
Chuck, I had, all right, I sent you a few questions this morning. I don't know if you just have you want to give us a quick 5-minute overview of the bonding process. We are new, and I know we had discussed possible more in-depth training in the next couple of weeks, which I have high hopes for.
Robert, I'll try to rattle through this fairly quickly for you. So how the bond process works is during the year, the mayor has conversations with different department heads on different projects out there that they feel that they need from the residents of the city of Binghamton. At the budget time, we go through each one of these projects with the departments and try to understand exactly what's required with these projects and what the need is. After the mayor decides to make a decision on what projects he wants to move forward or not, the mayor and I will sit down and we'll go through how do we fund these projects. There's different avenues to fund it. You can fund it through taxes, you can fund it through grants, you can fund it through fund balance, or you can fund it through bond ordinance. Once we decide that, that's how we put it into the budget. It then goes to city council for them to review during the budget process. And once approved, it's part of the budget. The following January time period, after that budget's been passed, I will put together all those projects, send it to our bond council, which is Hawkins and Delafield out in New York City. They'll put together a bond ordinance that I believe is part of this package. Okay, outlining all the bond stipulations and the projects themselves. That will then come to you as it is tonight to discuss and for your approval. Between now and when the process is final, which is if it's February 7th, all the seekers for these projects need to be done by engineering. Okay. Council also needs to hold a public hearing, which you would want to set before you vote on that. Council approves or rejects the bond ordinance. Assuming that the bond ordinance gets passed, there's then a 20-day grace period that's called an estoppel period, where people in the community could come back and argue this bond ordinance and say that it's not right or it's incorrect, of that nature. Finance Department will then set up the project in our system so that employees know that it's out there and they can start putting things together for it. After it's approved and it's gone through the estoppel period, I will say in the early March time period, I will start putting together what we call an official statement. I don't know if anyone's seen one of those. It's probably about a 40-page document is basically selling the city of Binghamton to bond investors. During this process, we'll also go through a Moody's ratings if it's a bond. If it's a ban, we don't necessarily have a Moody's rating hearing. That official statement goes out in the public. We'll put a bid out there for bond investors to make a bid on what we want to borrow money and what it's for. And then after that, we will award the bond to that holder. Those bonds can be anywhere from a year basis of a ban, which is a ban anticipation note. Like all these projects on here, they would be a 1-year ban that would roll over 1 year at a time, up to 5 years, and then they could go long-term into a bond, which would be 25 to 30 years long, depending on that length of time. I don't know if that answers the process.
Good start. Anyone else have any questions so far?
No.
Let me reiterate one other thing, Robert, that I told you is I've been in touch with our bond attorneys and there's no doubt that we have a lot of new people, not only on city council, but we got a new clerk and deputy clerk, as well as corp counsel. They're going to come up here and do what they call a bond 101 course, which is about a 3 or 4 hour course to go through a little bit more of the details and what everyone's function is in the process. Hopefully that will happen in, I'm going to say within the next 2 weeks. I can't guarantee you that. But he's getting with some of his other partners to see who can cover for him. So 1 or 2 of them can come up and do that course.
So this almost 12 million, where does that put us in terms of our bonding limits? What headspace is left there? And then maturity on these is going to be how long? And then I guess also, is there usually a street reconstruction bond that comes later in the year? So where do we?
This is
How
part
does
of
that
that, this is part of that street reconstruction is in here. So if you look at some of the items that Megan has here, they have like water line, sewer line, street reconstruction, that's all part
So
of
there
it.
won't be a separate street reconstruction coming later. All right,
For bonding.
Right.
for bonding.
Yeah, there was separate, included in the 2024 budget, but
We also will get some CHIPS money to do some road reconstruction also.
That's kind of why I thought it was a separate thing, because the CHIPS money.
The CHIPS is actually part of the budget process.
Okay. And Megan, maybe this sort of goes more toward you, as far as, we obviously weren't here for the last year's budget discussion. So just, looking at over some of these, projects, I'm just wondering, the general kind of water sewer line improvements and stuff in here, was there, in choosing to bond for these amounts, was there any leftover funding from previous years that was considered or that's hanging around? Any previous projects that have been bonded for that we still have money in lines for, or is the well dry?
yeah, so it's a budgeting question, so Chuck would probably be able to give the better answer.
What ends up happening when we're going through the budgeting process, we go through all the different lines. So I'll use the water lines as an example. We may have 250,000 left over at the end of September that we didn't need to use. So we take what we think we need next year and then subtract that 250 from there to arrive at the number that we did. So when we do the budgeting process, there's a lot of estimations that go into these.
So, but in any of these specific cases, was there this estimation is going forward now. So is there any leftovers as well, basically?
There's definitely leftover funds from like the prior bond ordinance, yes, but when we did the budget number, we did that calculation into the process based off of what road works need to be done, what we think the water and sewer lines are gonna cost, and things of that nature. So the numbers we have here are what we think are correct.
Also, there's a couple of item C, the sewer study, and N, the general engineering design projects. What are they covering? And is it normal to bond for a study? It seems like that's more of a usual expense rather than something that would, you think of bonding for more longer term items that say in private life would, be long-term depreciables, sort of.
The answer to that question is we've done this on a regular basis. So if you take a study, sometimes a study is required before you can do an engineering, before you can get a grant. If we put it in the budget, I'm just going to use the number like the engineering designs here for $300,000. That would be $300,000 that the taxpayers would pay in 1 year. By taking that through a band process, we're allocating that 300,000 over a 4 or 5 year period. So it's less input, less cost to the taxpayers.
And you had asked about the Murray to Crary project specifically?
Well, it's separated out in here. The other one is just engineering design projects. I don't know what specific projects that's covering.
Sure. So I think a couple ones that we had in mind were other infrastructure projects. So design for like flood wall conduit inspections, a Ball Avenue pump station design. The $300,000 would go to various infrastructure, similar to the Murray to Crary interceptor, which we would hope would address flooding issues on the west side for that one specifically. Just more infrastructure money, if that makes sense.
Robert, let me expand off of that a little bit. I didn't quite hear exactly what you said, but if you take the interceptor from Murray to Prairie Avenue, I'm going to compare that to the 6th Ward Interceptor project, which started back in 2017. We did a study, and I think it might have cost us $350,000, $400,000, such as this, which is basically taking all the sewer lines that run along the Susquehanna River on the south side. So we did a study to figure out how we can do this and what we have to do it. Then we did some design work. Now we're ready to do some design work, and the project as a whole is going to be about $13 million. We've been able to, I don't know if it's actually come to council yet. It may have, it may not have, but we're going to get, I believe, a $3 million state grant for this project and another, hopefully $5 million federal grant. So out of this $13 million project, the city's going to get basically $8 million. And that's because we were able to do a study. We've been able to do design work. And in order to get grants through EFC, which is a leg of the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, you have to have ready projects. If you come in and say you want to do X, Y, Z, and it's going to take you 5 years, they will not give you a grant. You have to have a design-ready project ready to go and get into their system to get rolling.
Right. So I guess what I would like to see is sort of, you're kind of describing a pipeline of project that starts with these design studies or whatever. And I'd sort of like to get a fuller picture of what that pipeline looks like and why, why it's appropriate to bond for these designs and such at this point in order to get a grant at that point in order to, it's like we're looking at it through a slit, you're not getting the full, the full picture of it. And it's not in small part because we did not go through the budget process that generated all of this, of course. So I'm just trying to get a fuller picture of what is in these general lines.
The one thing that might be helpful too, Councilman, is the budget hearings from last year. I'm not sure if you had a chance to watch them.
Not all of them, no, not
Okay.
yet, but yes, that's on my to-do list, yeah.
Yeah, there is one specifically, one budget hearing on the city YouTube page that goes over the capital improvement plan. So that should get in more fully to these projects. But if you have specific questions on any of the projects, we can try to answer them tonight or get back to you and connect you with the department head.
Well, I mean, we have a couple weeks to study this further. One other minor question. The one thing that we did have something to do with the fire pumper truck. There's grant funding listed for 250,000 of that, but that 250,000 was not subtracted from the total cost. Is that normal or?
So that is the grant from Senator Webb's office that we came down to council last
the
work
two-
session.
Right, so when we do a bond ordinance, we have to put the total cost of the project, okay? And I won't use this one as example, I'll make up another example. Is if you have a $2 million project and you're gonna get a $500,000 grant, you have to show in the bond ordinance the $2 million total cost of the project. And then you'll see that is grant funding expected, being a separate line item, you'll see that in there. So the total cost, when we did this last September was 850,000 and we anticipated a $250,000 grant. So long-term, it would have been $600,000.
Yeah, so, but why is the amount of the bonds authorized still $850,000?
Because in most of these cases, I have to borrow the 850,000 and then I pay it back with the grant money at the end. It's usually a reimbursable grant.
And is that the case with this one or we don't know?
Yes, that is the case for the pumper truck.
So we still have to borrow.
The 850.
The 850.
But not long-term. I'll borrow it as a ban, as like a 1-year deal. Okay, pay for it up front, and then the following year, when we get the grant money, the 250, I'll pay down the principal that's required for that 1 year, plus the 250 and borrow probably about 550.
So I think I asked, how close are we to our bonding limit now and how are rates looking now, Mr. Comptroller?
When I did this, in the beginning of, January, I'll send you that. I think the number was like 67% that I did at the beginning of January. That does not include these.
And how does that compare to other municipalities in our sort of our cohorts, if you will?
I'm not sure exactly how it compares to local people. I'm sure we're probably worse than some and better than others. Citywide or statewide. I don't know about locally.
But that's where Moody's will come in and give, like our Moody's rating has generally been
Yes,
good over
it's
the
been
years.
consistent. Or Moody's rating has been consistent.
Doing a lot of talking again. Anybody?
No.
All right, I think
I do have a question. With us being close to that 70% max bonding, what happens if any of these projects go over budget?
So Ms. Rathmellen, Madam President, I'll just reiterate what was said at the last work session. This is a unique situation and it's certainly an uncomfortable one, but with the sort of dual appointments and being before a judge now, department heads won't be answering questions from either individuals who have been appointed. I would just request for the efficiency of the meeting, if Ms. Rathmel could direct her questions or hold them and give them to the city clerk afterwards.
Would any council person
Not
like to
advise
ask
them to not answer my questions would be an
would any-
alternative.
excuse me, all right. Would someone like to reiterate that question that we just heard?
Sure. Oh, you got it.
Any project budget, how does that affect the bonding?
I mean, answer.
Yeah, that's check.
No project should ever go in any over budget. I will tell you, since I've been here, no budget, no project has ever gone over budget. If it does, I'll use an example, is if we come into a project that's $1 million project and we're just gonna need to go up to 1.1 million, we'd have to come back and ask council to borrow an extra 100,000 or increase the cost of that project by $100,000 and pay for it some other way. Those are the two things that we've done in the past.
When you say no project's gone over budget, what about rec park and the tennis court? I mean, that obviously with the time and materials had to go over budget. So is that what you would have had to have do
Yes.
when that was bonded?
Yes, so every one of those projects have been, each time that we've increased the cost of the project, it came to council first.
Okay, just being a construction guy myself, projects always do run into stuff and we'll go over cost. I mean, even materials can change in price overnight, so.
One final one for me as far as just a specific kind of, this will be more dialogue later, but that item M, the flood wall levy reconstruction. Flood walls are obviously a big deal in Binghamton. We all went through a couple of floods. But I was just wondering about this city versus Army Corps of Engineer responsibility and relationship. And I thought we were kind of had to be hands off with the flood wall. I thought they were in charge of a lot of that. So I'm just kind of curious on where that where the overlap is or where the connection is.
Sure. So this project specifically is the flood wall that's behind the Binghamton Plaza. The DEC is mandating this work. It's related to the Riverwalk project there. And the DEC is saying that the levee height has settled a bit since that project, and they are mandating the city to do this work to, in some areas, raise the levees. So that in that case, it would be the city's responsibility.
All right, so now I'm out over my skis here and saying that I thought the Army Corps of Engineers actually owned the flood walls essentially. I'm just, we can talk about it later, but I'm just the nuts and bolts of that relationship I'm interested in.
Any
That-
further
that-
questions?
Now that you bring that up, I remember this from a previous meeting, but wasn't it I think it was the contractor did something wrong that is causing the erosion or the levee to be jeopardized in some way, but now the city is fixing the mistake for the contractor? Is that what we're doing with this? Or
I don't know the specifics of it, just that the DEC is mandating the work. And that there's been settling and they're requiring us to raise it in some areas, and that it's related to that Riverwalk project. But beyond that, I would have to look into it and get back to you.
Yeah, it'd be great to know who did the original work on that walkway. Really appreciate that.
Sure.
Any further questions? Okay.
Thank you
Hearing
both.
none. Thank you
Thank you.
so
Thank
much.
you.
Thanks for hanging out, Chuck.
We'll welcome up Kent Drake Strays. And I will hand things over for Councilman Porter, Chair of the Employees Committee, to introduce RL 2414 and lead our discussion.
Okay, so 24.
you want to wait till you
Yeah, so. yeah, that's all.
He's got somebody.
Hello, Ken. How you doing? So the 2414 to amend the 2024 engineering budget by reducing the A 1440.5 for the administrative assistant by 33,000 and increasing it to 33,000 for the senior account clerk. Basically, the engineering department is refilling this pre-existing senior account clerk position. And the annual salary for the senior account clerk is $40,924.02. Is there, basically, I have a couple of questions if it's okay. I'm just I need a little bit of clarification on this, because is this like a position that needs to be filled or in some form or how long has it not been filled or? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, it's a position.
Push it up to your mouth.
I think when it
Yeah. Yeah, it's a position that needs to be filled. There used to be two active positions in engineering, the administrative assistant and the senior account clerk. And I'm not sure how long ago, but a period ago, the administrative assistant left and the senior account clerk was the only person there in the department. And they kind of took on both positions. But as it turned out, she was really good at it, right? And kind of held that down. But according to civil service, she could only be in that position for so long as the administrative assistant. So without passing the civil service exam, so she's got to go back to her role as senior account
clerk. Oh, okay. I remember we had to talk about this. I remember that.
Yeah.
Okay, so now this clarifies this a little bit. All right. Anybody else have any other questions involving? I'm sorry.
Great. So we'll move on to the next piece of legislation, which is also going to be, oh, I have one announcement in between. There are agendas or packets, up here, all the way up here, for people who are here in person that would like to follow along with a paper copy. All right, going back to it, I'll let Alamni Porter introduce our next RL.
Okay, RL 2415 is the amend the 2024 general fund budget for responsibility adjustment for superintendent of streets as acting DPW commissioner, and then the first deputy commissioner to take additional responsibilities of the superintendent streets roles for a calendar of 2024, 26 pays and plus 2 days. This ordinance is to amend the 2024 final fund budget to increase first deputy by $8,458.67, and to increase the superintendent of streets by $25,375, and decrease the DPW commissioner by $33,834.42. And responsibility adjustment of acting commissioner is $968.54 pay period, and a $322.85 pay period for the first deputy commissioner. I was wondering with this, is this permanent, or is this a permanent position, or do y'all plan on?
No, we hope not.
Oh, we plan on, is there a hiring process there?
Yeah, we've been advertising the commissioner, DPW commissioner for months now. Months and months, and it remains unfilled. It was being again kind of temporarily filled by the outgoing. He had agreed to stay, extend his stay, but that ended. So he retired and left it open. So now the two listed there, basically there's three positions, the deputy and the streets person are doing all three jobs. There's two people doing those three jobs. And so they're just sharing the burden basically of those three jobs.
That was going to bring me to my next question on what is not getting done, or what other things that were not being done
Right.
with having all these two positions being
Right.
going back and forth.
Well, the idea is that's the point. Nothing doesn't get done. So they're working a lot of hours and a lot more responsibility. Thus the pay adjustment for them. And we're trying to turn that around as quickly as possible, because I don't know how sustainable that's going to be. Anyway, just in terms of their time.
Okay. have any. I
Are
don't
there
have
any more
questions.
extraordinary measures that you're taking to fill the top spot here, or?
Yeah, we've been advertising it. We've thrown that out to other municipalities. I've been in contact with other municipalities specifically, see if they have any all-stars who are ready to step up to that kind of position. And again, so far, not even, we don't even have any applications in all that time. So it's not like they're unqualified, don't even have anyone who's applied.
So you're pretty comfortable with doing this funding for the year, it sounds like.
Well, we're
I
gonna
mean,
have to
you-
do it
you-
as long as we have to, I
But
suppose. but
the
yeah.
transfers for, the rest of the year. right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Unless something shifts dramatically. I guess we should be prepared for that, and these two gentlemen need to be prepared for that, but they're doing a good job so far.
Okay. All right.
Has there been any discussions on, like, why no one wants to apply? Is it something like, is there starting to be considerations about changing the job description or shifting responsibilities around so that the job is a desirable job?
Right. The position kind of tracks compared to other, DPW commissioners, so there's nothing particularly unusual about it. Salary is always an issue. But yeah, outside of that, I don't know if we can get a bigger office or something like that, but no. There isn't really much to do with it outside of salary, of course.
How did you arrive at the amounts that are being supplemented for each position?
Yeah, so we did a desk audit for all three of those positions. We broke down each line item within their position descriptions, which you have attached in there. And then looked at those each one of those lines represents a percentage of the time that they take, that's taken up, within that job. And to address the question of, well, what's not being done in there? Because if everybody's job equals 100% of someone's time, then there should not be additional time to do those things. So there's a little bit of trickle down with that, but ultimately figuring out which one of those things, those line items can overlap enough so that they relate to something that they're already doing. So they just have to do it more. So it becomes more of a volume issue than changing, an actual line on a position description. Because they both work for the commissioner DPW. Anyway, just a lot of it is, I do this, I just have to do more of it. So again, figuring out the percentage of the time and breaking it down, there goes my voice, by the hour, basically what they would be paid by the hour, and then expanding that out.
Any further questions from any council members? Okay, hearing none, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And,
You can't.
Thank you.
thank you.
Thanks for having me.
And I will hand things over to Councilman Hotchkiss, our committee chair for planning, to introduce RL 2416, and we'll invite Chris Slider down as our presenter for this section.
Want the peppermint? Yeah, thank you. Reference thing, thank you.
Good evening. Thank you.
Hey, Chris, how's it going?
Good, good.
So this is a resolution authorizing the mayor to enter into a professional services agreement with Lobella Associates for code review of large plan sets. This is a 3-year term agreement with a right to add 2 one-year extensions. Can you just give us a broad overview of why we're seeking this?
Yeah, from time to time, the building construction office encounters projects that are sizable, not only in the amount of time that it takes to perform the review, but the complexity of the jobs. we do run into times where we really need professional engineers to evaluate mechanical systems for New York State Energy Code, fire safety systems for life safety. Structural engineers need to be involved in order to make sure that the proposed plans are going to be structurally sound and provide the local people who are going to be using these facilities the safety that they're entitled to. The plans can be either time consuming so that it's taking away from the mom and pop constituents who are trying to get work done on their homes or on their properties, or they become so complex that we really need to outsource to a professional engineering firm to provide that kind of oversight. And this is just on an as needed basis. There is really no specific project in the pipeline right now, but rather than, because we've seen so many in the past, rather than coming to the Board of Contracts and Supplies on a one-time basis each time, we're just saying, let's set up an agreement with this engineering firm that if and when we run into this type of scenario, we'll have somebody already pre-approved to perform the services for us.
Thank you. I guess, so with like the pre-approval, when they're entering into a contract, do they still have to get approved here again? If
That's
it's
what
like-
you're doing now. You're saying that the mayor would enter into an agreement saying if and when we need these services, this company was selected from 8 different companies who all submitted their proposals under an RFQ, the request for qualifications. We took the top 3 firms, brought them in for interviews, had them make presentations to us. And of those 3, we picked the most qualified candidate to say, if we need these services, that would be the candidate that we would select over and over again, rather than coming back to, well, it wouldn't be council, would be the Board of Contracts and Supplies, but they would, each individual time we needed those services, we would have to go through that whole process all over again. So this is kind of a blanket policy. This says, it's similar to the ones that we already have with, Gort Construction. If the city needs a house demolished and we demolish, 20 houses a year, we don't need to get 20 approvals. We get 1 approval for Gork, and saying if and when we ever need a building demolished, that will be the company that we go to. We've already vetted them. We've researched their qualifications. We've checked the references.
I guess my question is, do we have to approve funding for them to do the work?
No,
Oh,
you don't.
no?
You're not approving funding for it.
Already in your budget for this work.
Right.
Is what you're saying.
Right.
The question is the vendor.
Hmm?
The question is the vendor, not the
Yeah.
money. The money has already been approved in your
The
budget.
question is the vendor. Can
Right.
we continue? Can we select 1 out of 8? Select the most qualified one and say, when we need these services, that's the company that we would prefer to use.
So on average, how many times a year does this
It's-
service usually need to be done?
They've already been hired twice this year. Well, not 2024, but between summer of 23 and now, they were hired twice, but they were hired by the developer.
Right, so there's no like hourly lists of rates and stuff in here. Which I would sort of expect to see. And then is there any chance to, with these highly complex projects, is there a mechanism to have it paid for by whoever's developing it rather than out of city coffers? Or is there any way to recoup funds? Has that ever been looked at?
The funds are covered under the permit application fee, the funds that are used to pay for the review.
So it is you're recouping
Right.
what you're spending here.
Yeah. This is an example of this would be Helio Health taking the old sheltered workshop and turning that into an apartment complex. The fact that it's 3 separate buildings means that it has to be structurally evaluated so that each building will respond to either seismic or weather related activity in its own independent way. It's 3 different construction types, and we really have to have structural engineers go through and say, if there's construction joints or expansion joints connecting these buildings together, and we run into some kind of weather event or seismic event, that these buildings are going to each behave in their own individual way without creating a negative impact on the adjacent building. It's also, very complex fire safety system, and New York State's Energy Conservation Code requires a very extensive review of the mechanical systems to make sure that we are keeping the structure as green as possible with regards to energy consumption. These are all very complex things that are better handled by professional licensed engineers than doing it in-house. And it's not uncommon. I mean, this company already works for Glens Falls, New Paltz, Batavia, Utica, New Rochelle, Malta, Rochester. Probably wouldn't use them, but Rochester employs 3 full-time engineers in-house with salaries that are far more expensive than hiring a company on a,
Right, so.
case by case basis.
I know one of Chuck's drives has been local firms. So these folks are out of Latham, which is not precisely local. In your,
All the companies have offices all over the eastern seaboard. Some of them were a little bit farther from home. This one actually is heavily invested in New York State. They do have a local office in Vestal. They have, offices in Rochester, Albany. But all of the companies that we interviewed were pretty diverse as far as locations.
but none from county based.
Some have offices here, but they're not necessarily headquartered here. The flagship office isn't necessarily here.
Okay.
So Chris, when you decide to hire them, is that based on the complexity of a project, or if it's like the size of a project, like a 50 Front Street, if there's a monetary value? So if it's like a $15 million project, is that like, hey, that'll be out of our scope? Or is it because based on shelter shop, if it's 3 buildings, the complexity of it?
Those kind of go hand in hand. When we're looking at $20 million, we're looking at a very complex project.
Yeah, I mean, I could
Yeah.
imagine hiring them for 50 Front Street over the housing project on Munsell Street.
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely. Yeah.
That's what I wanted to
Yep.
show.
Yep.
I'm gonna bring up something we talked about at a previous work session. We would like to be going forward. Obviously, this is RFP predates us, but going forward, we'd like to make sure we get an invite when there are pitches for making these types of contracts, to
Yep.
make sure that city council's there.
Is
When-
for what?
What, next time there's an RFP going forward,
Oh, yeah.
we would like to be included when companies come to pitch.
Oh, yeah,
Obviously,
yeah.
We're
Yeah.
too far, this process
Yeah.
predates us.
Yeah,
but
this all
we're kind of
started, at the end of
starting
last
to
summer. right.
notify department
Yeah,
heads that we
absolutely.
would, as city council, we'd like to
Yeah,
start getting involved earlier in the process
Yep.
going forward.
fully agreed. Yep.
Are there any other questions from any council members?
No.
Okay,
So, no,
Oh, great,
so
Scott.
so there's no projects in the pipeline that you anticipate using their services for?
No, not right now. They've already handled 2 large complex projects on a one-off basis. So I don't have another one, but we anticipate some pretty large projects coming down the pipeline, and we want to be prepared when we get those.
Okay.
Unfortunately, a lot of the developers don't consider how much time it takes to do the plan review on these things, and everybody's always in a hurry by the time they get to us. So being able to provide them with a fast turnaround and help keep them on track while not ignoring some of our local constituents who also need our services, it's really the goal.
Right. So they're not gonna do anything with 200 Court Street?
They've already done that.
Oh, they already did it.
They
Okay.
already did that
Gotcha.
review. Yeah. That was one of the projects that they did, and that was very complex.
Gotcha.
But they had 15 different engineers working on it. We don't even have 15 people in our office, and there's just no way we could have done what they did.
I don't have any further questions. Does anybody else?
Hello, how you doing?
Good.
I'm a little confused because I thought, maybe you can correct me. Isn't Labella involved with 23 Charles Street, with involving the 23 Charles Street for whatever purpose they have plan going on with that? as well.
The facility that's the Save-A-Lot, the old Save-A-Lot building doing.
No, on Charles Street on near Clinton Street, off of Clinton Street. Is the smokestack building, the old battery facility.
I don't have, the only project we have over there is the Save-A-Lot building that's owned by the Stantons is, you know, they vacated that space and we have a new company coming in who's going to be doing, you know, kind of a showroom for manufacturing facilities.
That's way in the back, right? That's way in the back, right?
Yeah, it's actually on Emerson
It's
Parkway.
on Emerson, yeah, it's like.
Emerson Parkway,
It
right?
used to be the Save Around, right?
Save Around, you know, the
Save
Save
Around,
Around
okay.
building.
Yeah, that's.
But that's just for the Save Around building? I thought it was, okay.
I think they're just, yeah, the only project that I'm aware of right now is the Save Around building is just, it's getting a facelift. It's a mostly interior surfaces. It's not really a construction project. They're not doing new electrical or heating or mechanicals. It's just changing it from an office space to a showroom for manufacturing processes and equipment. But if there is a, you know, a conflict of interest that's already been addressed, that they wouldn't be doing a review on their own job, we wouldn't use them for that.
The only reason why I thought maybe something there, because I remember going to a neighborhood watch and they had stopped by the neighborhood watch and mentioned a possible project working on.
Yeah, we don't have anything in the pipeline right
Okay.
now. It's
Alright.
it's not often that we get plans from them, but if we did, obviously we'd be aware of the conflict of interest and we would, you know, not put the mice in charge of the cheese, so to speak.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Sure.
Thank you so much. Any last questions? Going one, going twice? Okay, thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
And I will keep allowing Councilman Hotchkiss as Chair of Planning to introduce RL 2417, and we'll invite down Tito Martinez. Is he here? Oh, or is it Megan? Is Megan? Okay, Megan Hyman, Deputy Mayor, coming to fill in.
You know. Thank you.
Madam President, I apologize. Tito is out sick today. So I believe his department had sent an email to the clerk just a few minutes before the work session. Just asking if we could postpone this.
Thank you so much. Do I need to do? Okay, great. We will follow up.
Thank you.
Thank you, Megan.
All right. All right, so then we will still have Councilman Hotchkiss as Chair of Planning, introduce RL 24-18, and we'll invite up Stephen Carson as our presenter. Thank you.
Hello, everyone.
Hi, Steve.
Hi.
Hi.
So this is what is it? This is RL 24-18 to hold a public hearing on February 7th, 2024 for a NYS HCR grant for the North Shore Tower Elevator Project. This is per NYS HCR requirements. Can you just give us an overview of what this is?
So this was a grant that was applied for a couple of years ago. The state, like the city, is an entitlement entity and receives CDBG money like the city. In this specific case, the city then acts as a subrecipient, in essence, of the state. The state has its own CDBG rules and requirements that are a little different from the cities. It's based off interpretation of the regulations. And or using also the fact that it's New York State. So New York State may have its own rules and requirements. So for this particular grant, which was $450,000 to refit the elevators in the North Shore Tower, that's a 82 units building right across the street, housing elderly and the disabled. So a new elevator was useful for them there, or an upgraded elevator to bring it up with compliance was useful for it. But part of the many, many New York State regulations, to close out the grant, we essentially have to have a public hearing at the end of it, in which I state the status of the elevator project, which is the elevator project is done. And then we accept public feedback. I will be here for the public feedback portion of, as this is a public hearing, taking notes. Once that's done, I can submit those to, or actually I'll need the minutes, and then submit that to New York State HCR to close out the grant.
Thank you.
Mhm.
So where's this public hearing going to be advertised?
The clerk's office is welcome to do the standard public hearing announcement. But I will also be doing a separate public hearing and using language that New York State HCR is requiring as well. I have a template. It's ready to go as soon as tomorrow, basically. I'll submit it. The city can, of course, I don't know the city rules and requirements on public hearings as to whether the city needs to advertise its own public hearing announcement or not. I do not know.
Okay. I think, would you be open to just like, a lot of times in those elevators, people put flyers up about their notices for what's going on in the building or like in the neighborhood?
I can certainly let Housing Authority know, and ask them if they would be willing to put some sort of advertisement or some sort of announcement in the elevator itself. I certainly can.
It's super appropriate advertisement. So are we allowed to take a tour of the elevators? I know I've been there already, but
Certainly, you could either reach out, like the city clerk could reach out to the Housing Authority, or if you want me to communicate with the executive director of the Binghamton Housing Authority, who is Jean Westcott, I can certainly reach out and see what she thinks about you touring. It is a secured building, so you would have to get permission and make a time to go there, because otherwise you can't get in. But yeah, I can arrange that if you wish me to.
yeah, I think we want to, but so it's completed and we were just talking about being able to visit projects that are underway in the city that are like public projects. We just wanted to exercise that even though this is completed already. Yeah. So yeah, let's check out those elevators.
All right. Could the clerk potentially send me an email so then I have that officially, and then I can pass that on to Jean at the Housing Authority and schedule a time for it?
Yep.
Okay.
That would be excellent.
All right.
I don't think I have anything else. Does anybody else?
I just kind of have a question for Corporation Counsel, I think. So there's no legislation here. There's nothing we're voting on. I mean, could he just not have asked to have been included in our agenda for the February 7th meeting? This is going to be concurrent with our February 7th meeting. Right, but then we will do it concurrently with our business meeting that night, before or after, or concurrently, right? Yeah. Like this does not need an RL number. There's not. No.
So the answer is yes, that we standardly have an RL for this. And because we are going to be voting to set the public hearing.
So when are we going to vote to set the public hearing? Wednesday?
Wednesday.
I guess Wednesday.
So this is technically expedited,
So then. Yeah,
But-
yes.
but we're not. They're having the public hearing. We are listeners to the public hearing. Right, Steve?
The public hearing is, I mean, the language that I was communicated with by HCR was it needs to be the legislative body, like the regular legislative bodies meetings. That's where this public hearing needs to be in. So you would basically hold this just as you would any other public hearing for city council. So it's supposed to take place during a city council business meeting, just like normal, any other public hearing.
All right, well,
We'll take it offline. Thank you. Are there any other questions? Okay, hearing none. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And I'm going to be passing things over to Councilman Dundon, who is the chair of the DPW committee, to introduce RL 24-19. And the, our presenter is Ron Lake, engineering. Thank you.
Thanks for coming out, Ron. So this legislation is for the mayor to enter into an intermunicipal agreement with Tioga for stormwater regulation implementation in Broome and Tioga counties. So the executive summary is Phase 2 federal stormwater regulations require that regulated small municipal separate storm sewer operators must prepare and implement stormwater management program that includes 6 minimum control measures. Ron, how long in effect prior to this?
We've been doing it for several years.
Okay.
They provide, when you talked about the minimum measures, Southern Tier 8 through the coalition, and most of the municipalities around us are part of this coalition. And Southern Tier 8 does minimum measures 1 and 2, which is they take care of the education components that we're required to do. And they, maybe you've heard of water for rain, rain for water and stuff like that. Just different things that educate people on how to keep the stormwater clean. You know, like no dumping here or around the catch basins, different things like that. They do that for us. And then as a coalition, we hold public hearings and we do things that we have to do according to those regs. January 3rd started a new 5-year permit. So everything that we used to do is getting much harder to do now with all the new regulations. So it's a valuable asset for us. And if we had to do it by ourselves, we'd pay twice or 3 times what they charge us to do that. So it's a really good deal for the city.
Okay. Yeah, because this is just based off stormwater runoff. This has nothing to do with water treatment or sewage treatment, correct?
No,
Okay.
no. This is, it's called MS4, which means Municipal Separate Storm Sewer Systems.
Okay.
But it's a really great thing for the city that we have this coalition.
And then this is based off, now, if New York State DEC changes their regulations yearly with this coalition being locked into a multi-year agreement, you're able to change based on what the state says?
Yeah, the new permit is a 5-year, so it won't.
Oh,
change
okay.
For 5 years.
Okay. Now, even if something comes from the national, that won't change it?
If EPA comes out with something more, it would change it. They would give an amendment.
Okay. Okay. I don't have any more questions.
One question. So, do we have a job title identified for who will be the liaison for Binghamton?
Right now, it's me.
Like to keep it you.
The person that I had helping me left us a year ago, so I'm trying to hire a new person. Until that happens, it'll be me and some help.
We're looking at repopulating the Environmental Commission. And I saw in here that it has that the city's able to designate additional representatives. Do you have any thoughts on if we have our Environmental Commission in action, having an additional representative assisting you from that committee?
That would be fine.
Anyone else have any questions?
Actually,
right.
Actually, the more people in government who know about this program, the better it makes my life.
Love that attitude. Thank you so much. And you get to sit right there as Councilman Hotchkiss introduces
No, this is
nope,
me.
Dundon, sorry, Dundon. Jumped on the list here. Dundon introduces RL 24-20.
So the proposed title for RL 24-20 is a resolution authorizing the mayor to enter a supplemental agreement number 4 with Barton. I'm not even going to try to pronounce that.
Judas.
LaJudas, thank you. Now I know it. For the USA COE State Department C pipe rehabilitation work for phase 3. This resolution is authorizing the mayor to enter a supplemental agreement for requesting compensation in the amount of $6,800 for additional services provided. The USACE agreeing to elimination and removal of slide gates within levee structures DS 1A, 30, and 75. So I do have one question. Hang on one. I know, write it down. So with this supplemental agreement, does the previous city engineer Ray Standish now work for them? And are they the same consultant that screwed the tennis courts up at Rec Park? And then why give contracts to second-rate consultants?
The answer is yes, yes, and yes, and they've had this contract for a long time, so there's nothing I can do about it.
Okay.
But here it's somewhat good news because when the Army Corps and DEC first looked at these 3 structures,
Yes.
they told us that we had to put back in slide gates in the structure, even though we didn't think they were needed. So I had asked, I'll call them BNL, to go back to the Army Corps and go back to DEC and fight for us and tell them that what they were telling us to do was a waste of money. They finally convinced them that, yes, we didn't need them because we had closed pipes, not open pipes. And it probably saved the city close to $100,000 at each location.
Okay. So
So it's money well spent here.
okay, 'cause I do have this that I'm just kind of curious about. So I have RL 1949 that was signed back by Rich David. And it shows how he reduced the payment by $10,000 on supplemental number 3 agreement. So is this 6,000 we're reimbursing back from the 10,000 we reduced back then?
It would be an add to that.
Okay.
We took away. Yes.
All right. I have no other questions.
Anyone else?
I do. I have 3 questions, and if you choose not to answer, I'll defer to a fellow council member. And I think you just answered the first one. So BNL completed the initial inspection or the city did?
The initial inspections were done by the Corps of Engineers and the DEC.
Okay, and the additional services they're requesting compensation for were not originally identified in that inspection?
No. No, this is work that they went above and beyond after I requested that they do it, because they were ready to design those lift gates.
Some of the, so the letter that they submitted indicated some inefficiencies in obtaining information. If the city caused the inefficiency, what measures are being implemented to ensure this doesn't continue to happen?
It was not the cities, it was the inefficiencies of them being able to deal with DEC and the Army Corps for a long period of time. It
The
was,
back and forth about the gates?
yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Any further questions? Nope. Thank you so much for coming
Thank
down.
you.
Thank you. And now I'm going to hand things back to Councilman Hotchkiss, in his role as Chair of the Special Rules and Procedures Committee, to introduce RL 24-21.
All right. So this is RL 24-21. This is an ordinance requiring elected and appointed officials to submit an annual financial disclosure declaration. And there's a attached form of what this could look like. This was actually introduced by former council member Aviva Friedman. It got put down, but I think it's appropriate to reintroduce this because it's a very basic measure to introduce a little bit of transparency and avoid financial conflicts of interest in some of the business that we do here in the city. I I haven't done a ton of research on this, and I think this form needs to be reworked with language that says like City of Binghamton specifically. But I think it serves as a good template to build off of. I think it's completely appropriate that we have this. They have this at the county. And I think we should have it in the city. So if you guys have any questions for me that I need to answer before we move forward, please,
Sure.
please ask.
I'll go first. So what if someone doesn't give their information? Like what happens? Like with that?
It's a great question.
What if I don't want to give my information? No, I'm just messing. I don't want to give my.
I'll look into that.
Okay.
How,
I know the county uses this form. I was wondering if we know what some other municipalities in our sort of cohort, I'm gonna use that word again, do in terms of this. I also wonder if there's any, would this apply to department heads, for example, or are there civil service conflicts with this sort of thing? So that's another question. And what's the timeline for implementation? Is this, we're gonna pass it and we're gonna do it this year, or is it gonna go into effect for next fiscal year, or what? Or these are all questions to be hammered out later?
I can tell you my initial thoughts. So as far as timeline, I'd say once this is passed and approved, I would think like 30 days would be appropriate to make it happen. And then potentially like 30 days of either new appointments or people being elected and sworn into office, that this would be completed. I think that's a reasonable amount of time, but I think I would extend it if that's necessary. I don't think beyond 60 days would be, as long as this is like on paper and done, and it also gets renewed annually.
Annually.
So that's the one thing. And then you said, does it apply to, so this just has basic language about it being people that are appointed. So there's a lot of different people that are appointed, as we found out through this whole process. And I think there's like areas that it doesn't seem like it's appropriate, but then there's areas that were definitely seem appropriate. Like there's appointees to the BLDC, which they handle money and funds. So I think it's makes a lot of sense that they have all their financial disclosures on the table. But if it's like we have appointments to the Shade Tree Commission, which does seem a little bit more benign, and that you can't, it'd be harder to think of a conflict of interest there. But still, I think it's a good measure. It's a pretty big blanket, but I need to figure out if it's just like department heads as appointments, or if it goes through all the boards and commissions. We could iron that out further.
And what's the timeline you want on this? Do you want it like expedited right away?
I don't think I need this to be expedited. I've got some more questions to work out, and that exact language of the legislation needs to be.
I might suggest that that the Special Rules and Procedures Committee actually meet live on YouTube and have further discussions, potentially bringing in Corporation Counsel to answer some questions and
Okay.
think through implications. And then similar to the question about how do we actually enforce, or what happens if people do not fill out the paperwork. It's the simple question of where will the documents reside?
Yeah, that's.
Trying to think through some of that.
I think in the clerk's office was my initial thought, but
Being told there's a lot of guidance on this, so I think a nice committee meeting between now and our next business, not this Wednesday's business meeting, but our next business meeting would be advisable to set.
Yep.
Other questions? Okay, hearing none. I'm going to be turning things back over to Councilman Kavanaugh, Chair of Finance, to introduce RL 24-22, and we're welcoming up Ed Crum as our presenter. Oh.
Good evening. Thank you for coming. So Corporation Council informed us, beginning of the meeting, this has already been voted down by Johnson City. So would you like to start with a comment on that? And
I heard that. Our goal in bringing this forward is to take care of an item that didn't get addressed in the lead agency's project. So it's not a new project at the plant. So that the reason that Johnson City voted it down had to do with what I understand as new projects. So this is something different. We'll have to go back and work with them, you know, as to whether they can reconsider it or not.
okay, so we will investigate that. I appreciate the long detailed email that you sent and this extra packet of information that's here. And I think we have a treatment plant walkthrough scheduled soon, so we can
Yep.
see some of this in person. So I appreciate that. But I don't know how my other fellow council, looking forward to what you have to say, but I have some fundamental questions about it seems like a system was installed that has never worked right and had inadequate cooling pipes from the beginning. And like, who kind of screwed up when and where in the process of all this?
The first thing I want to say is that there should be a correction on the request to transfer funds in the upper left where it says 2024, that should say 2023, because we're talking about taking monies that are in the 2023 budget that just ended that weren't expended, which the IMA section 23G sub little I allows us to bring forth a request such as this within 45 days after the end of the calendar year. The project to put in the microturbines and the associated cooling water loop and other hardware was part of the owner's solid handling improvements. And this work took place between 2017 and 2021. The city was the lead agency for that project, so it's not a board project. We're charged with operating and maintaining the plant from the board, and what we're trying to do is get this system operational by having sufficient cooling water. I brought with me a section of a pipe that failed. That's part of the hydronic loop. That's 2 5/8 inch internal diameter. This black sphere is a 4-inch internal diameter, which the independent engineering report we procured recommends that size. So you can see the difference of what we're talking about, so that all of these will be able to be operated at the same time. We do have the ability to operate 3 right now so that there's some benefit from the system, but it's not the full benefit and it doesn't create the electricity that and the water, the heating water for the digesters that we'd like to be able to produce, which is the design. And so if there's any issue about what was installed there and whether there's any recourse, the sewage board's not a party to that because we weren't a party to that contract. The contract's between the city and the contractors, and I couldn't even tell you, which specific contractor did this particular work because it's part of the solids handling improvements. Quandel Construction Company, was the general contractor. There's a plumbing contractor. There's also, which was, John W. Danforth Company out of Victor, New York was the branch office, their headquarters in Buffalo. And there's electrical contractor, Matco Electric Corporation out of Vestal that was involved in the electric part of it. So, if there's an issue about that, that's something that is outside the scope of what the sewage board can pursue. What this RL seeks to do is to marshal funds to address these issues. If the owners have, the preeminent right as the owners, to decide what specifically might have to be done as far as any, pursuit of the prior construction, whether the statute of limitations, because it ended so many years ago, was no longer, it's no longer possible to do that. I don't know.
So from your email, this has never worked right. So
It's never worked at full capacity. That's correct.
there's 5 of these turbines and you can only operate 3
At
or
the same
something
time.
at the same time.
Right.
So you shift the load around so you're aging them
Yes.
sort of at the same rate. Okay. And you estimated, I think, of less than 5-year payback based on energy savings for this money when it's expended,
Correct.
because we're generating electricity off
Additional electricity if we have
this
the ability
digested
to run
gas.
5 instead of 3. Correct.
Um,
And the, pretty steep increases that are coming to us in electric. We're an industrial user, not the same as a household user.
so what's the life expectancy of these turbines that are now how many years old?
The turbines would have started in operation probably around 2021. The life expectancy, I'm not familiar with that. We could look that up and get it back to you. So.
So I would. This is $1 million. I'm just curious why no corrective action from the original contractors was, and I appreciate it's out of the board scope, I guess, but I mean,
Yeah, I
this
mean-
is not an unknown issue, right? Like,
This was turned, the improvements were turned over officially to the board last October. And so I think for us to have been able to identify and get this engineering report is timely action on our part.
So 2023, October is essentially when you became aware of.
The engineering analysis, because we knew there were problems, but we didn't have the engineering analysis.
What I'm curious about is besides the contractors, where's Jacob Engineering and all this? They were the ones that also, I believed when they wanted to private was pushing alveoli, if I pronounce that right, Veolia,
It's
thank you.
Veolia.
Thank you. So where were they in all this to not realize it was never running up to capacity?
Again, as a board member, I don't know. I'm not privy to that.
Just because from my standpoint, if we're going to go after any recourse on this, we should start with the engineering and besides just the contractors. Knowing that these contractors, like any other contractor, you only work with the blueprints you're given.
But Councilman Dunn, I would point out that Jacobs was the construction manager. The design engineer was GHD.
They'll be who you would be most liable for, and then they would have to go down and go after their subcontractors.
I don't disagree that the
I mean, if,
construction manager would enforce, test results and certification.
yeah, I just think they kind of were shoddy from the beginning on this, and I'd hate to see smaller subcontractors, especially somebody local like Matco, have to pay the recoups when you have Jacobs Engineering, who's $1 billion conglomerate or part of $1 billion conglomerate, walk away unscathed once again.
I certainly understand what you're saying, but the sewage board doesn't have the recourse because we weren't a party to the contract. We don't have the records. They reside somewhere else. The city was the lead agency.
Is that, and so you mentioned that the improvements were transferred to the board in October, however, so you would have access to all of that now?
Not the construction records, no,
Okay.
not the engineering records.
Okay, could you,
But the important part of this RL is to transfer the money because the way our budget works, we're an enterprise fund. And that monies that are not expended or encumbered by the end of the run out period for the calendar year, which usually lasts until somewhere toward the end of February. They go back through a process of the final billing and are refunded back to the municipal users. And then we would have to request in a new budget request for the 2025 budget, the money to do this project if we don't have means to do it presently, and we'd have to wait until we had that funding to proceed.
so to that end, you don't know, sitting here, you don't know yet where Johnson City is in their thought process or in their voting process.
No, I just heard today also that they didn't pass it, so.
Okay.
But this was approved by the board to submit back in December, which we had to wait until the start of the year because of the change in the council makeup. And we just, we want to be here before the end of the 45 days because then somebody will say, time's up, you're too late, and we don't want that to happen.
Okay. Oh,
I just had a quick question. How you're like proposing that this gets paid for is that you take out of your professional services line and then also the contingency line?
That's correct. These are unexpended funds. The board during calendar year 2023 did receive $1.5 million payment from FEMA and the New York State Division of Homeland Security Emergency Services to reimburse prior year 2013 to 2019 chemical costs associated with the temporary chemically enhanced primary treatment system. Because those budget years are now closed, the money can't actually be credited back to those years. And
So that's why this money's left over. You're saying, is it?
it was revenue that came in that wasn't in the budget for 2023 because it wasn't able, you can't predict when FEMA and the state equivalent of FEMA are going to be able to close something out.
You don't normally have an extra million hanging around at the end of the year.
Not in those budget lines.
Okay.
There might be altogether that kind of money, but it's not in those budget lines. That's correct.
the sidebar we had over here was relating to setting up a finance committee meeting with Corporation Counsel to discuss and think through fiduciary responsibilities and such. So I'm passing that information along. I sent you an email as well, but and Chuck Shager as well, potentially for that committee meeting. So stay tuned for everyone watching on YouTube at home. Committee meetings coming soon. Any final questions on RL 24-22?
Yeah, what's gonna happen with this? Is this money just gonna hang out if you don't try to use it for this repair or this like fix?
If this money isn't appropriated to the reserve fund, again, we don't have any contracts in place or anything yet because we need the source of funding. Then it goes back through the final billing process to the municipal users, to the sewage plant. There's the city, the village, and 9 other municipal users, one of which is Binghamton University as well. You know, it's in their share, it's based on the proportion of the billable wastewater flows to the total billable wastewater flow that comes into the plant. The ratio.
I had another
you.
question. How was the board able, to contract an engineering study without having records?
No, the record, this engineering study is for the heat recovery. We hired the engineer to tell us how come we're having these problems with the system. So they looked at the system and, you know, what our experience was with it.
Okay. I look back at the records.
So it's not a question of the construction records,
Okay.
you know, because they're actually looking at what is there on the ground.
Any final questions? All right. With that, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
A second.
Oh, bye.
I'll make the motion.
Oh, sorry. I'm sorry. I'm ready to go. Ready.
All right,
I'll
Councilman
second
Dundon, motion to adjourn, and
Second.
Councilman Middleton